Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Dr. Michael Rapici.
Dr. Barry
Falk.
Falk.
I bid you a good evening.
And the same to
Dr.
you,
Michael
sir.
Rapici.
Good evening, Barry. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm feeling kind of
full of beans.
I don't know if I'm full of beans, but I'm trying to be chipper. My term is ending. Is your term already over?
Yeah. I am in the process of.
Mine is approaching quiescence or dormancy or closure. And I'm feeling both anxious and giddy, a little bit giddy about it. And so I'm happy to be where I am right now, which is talking to you.
I'm glad to hear. I finished
about
last week
about something about an article of import.
Yes.
On Critical Media Studies podcast. Okay. Yes, please.
I was just going to say I finished last week and have just spent this week exhausted. So, but in a good way, in the kind of like I can sleep in a little bit and think smart things.
Oh, well, that sounds wonderful. I'm glad you're thinking smart things because we're going to have to put on our collective thinking caps today to talk about Mr. Benjamin Labatut. And his article in, I don't think this is the latest Harper's, but it was not the latest Harper's. It's June-July 2024 issue of Harper's Magazine. Benjamin Labatut, Chilean novelist and free-floating intellectual. The author of 2020's, is that right? 2020? I think so. 2020's breakout success, When We Cease to Understand the World, which engaged ideas from quantum physics. In this article that we're going to talk about today, The Gods of Logic, Before and After Artificial Intelligence, Benjamin Labatut is going to talk about AI. And he does it through an interesting frame. Do you want to say something about the frame, or do you want me to keep on?
No, I'll let you go because this is an interesting mix of history, which I found interesting.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the strands here before we talk about the essay.
Okay,
that's the strand, right? He gives a kind of history of AI.
Yeah.
Is this shocking to you? Well, let me tell you, he gives a kind of genealogy. Let me sort of fill in one of the frames. But also, I will tell you something that shocked and surprised me, and see whether or not it shocked and surprised you. I think it's kind of worth remarking on. So he's discussing AI. I guess before I say anything else, the thing that pricked our collective ears, if we can say that on the radio, is that Labatut is considering the question of AI using Frank Herbert's Dune as that's really kind of the main frame, the main conceit, so to speak, in which the platform on which he's sort of addressing the topic. And I guess let me say something briefly before I backtrack and tell you something else and to describe another major aim of the essay and something that surprised me. But since I mentioned the Frank Herbert Dune intertext, I should say what in particular he finds fascinating about Herbert's Dune and relevant to AI, and that Frank Herbert writing Dune at the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, conceptualizing the project. I believe he's Californian, and he is basically thinking, he's writing sci-fi at the dawn of cybernetics, right? This is the cybernetic age. But one of the interesting things, and this is what sparks Labatut's interest, one of the interesting things that Labatut notes in Dune is that there is, well, I'll read it actually. We will never know how many died during the Butlerian Jihad. Was it millions, billions, trillions, perhaps? It was a fantastic rage, a great revolt that spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. A war with a death toll so high that it left a permanent scar on humanity's soul. But we will never know the names of those who fought and died in it, or the immense suffering and destruction it caused, because the Butlerian jihad, abominable and devastating as it was, never happened. Jihad was an imagined event, conjured up by Frank Herbert as part of the lore that animates his science fiction saga Dune. It was humanity's last stand against sentient technology, a crusade to overthrow the god of machine logic and eradicate the conscious computers and robots that in the future Herbert had almost entirely enslaved us. So that's one of the conceits, one of the frames by which Labitut is revisiting this moment in Herbert at a pivotal moment in the development of cybernetics, where Herbert takes a surprising turn and imagines that, for humanity to progress, for humanity to have a future, you can't have artificial intelligence. That's the kind of surprising moral of Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And Labatut is sort of revisiting that in his essay. And so if I'll shut up after I just mention something still where we're trying to sort of give you a context for the essay. So there's the Frank Herbert frame, but you already mentioned the other thing that's going on here is giving us history in order to approach the subject of contemporary sentient intelligence and AI. And this is what I found both surprising and informative. Um, he gives a kind of potted history of human attempts to make thinking machines. And it begins with George Boole in the 19th century. We have the cybernetic moment that takes us to Frank Herbert land or the
Mm-hmm.
contemporary period. And then he moves to contemporary AI with the example of Geoffrey Hinton. And okay, last thing, I just want to tell you what surprised me when we were talking about the history a couple minutes ago. I never thought about this. I mean, I'm still trying to process this very elementary thing that I learned from Labitut. Until the 19th century, Michael, didn't this also kind of shock you? Until the 19th century and George Boole, you had mathematics and you had logic, and nobody thought about combining them. That's still kind of freaking me out.
I don't know. I mean, I think that those are sort of I think the big moments are always shockingly obvious in the rearview mirror. I didn't,
I guess so. I
you know,
guess so.
um, I think the thing that I like about this, and I don't want to spend too much time sort of talking about the composition of the essay so much as what he's actually doing in the essay. But there's an interesting sort of, you with Doom as the backdrop, or Dune as the backdrop here. And again, for those for listening, I've never seen Dune. I tried to sit down and watch it, and the
Did you not
faith
see
cons
I thought you might have seen the what's his name? Oh my goodness.
the
Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet. I'm having a senior moment here.
oh
The
God, so am
director,
I. What's his
David
name? David
Lynch.
Lynch.
David Lynch. You didn't see that version?
No, I haven't seen any of them. I don't sci-fi. It in a way it doesn't make sense that I stay away from it. I think I haven't had time. I tried to sit down and watch the new version of this, and haven't had time. But
It's only 4 hours long. What's your problem, man?
oh well, hold on. I'll be right back. Um, but what I found interesting is with sort of sci-fi as the backdrop of this, and then he alludes at the end, and I don't think I'm spilling any secrets here, to the importance or the potential importance of fiction moving forward.
Mhm.
And then the move in the middle to sort of invoke the Indian mythology around
Oh,
the
yes.
the
Oh,
altar of
right,
fire.
right,
There's this
right,
interesting sort
right.
of weave of, hey, here's history, and then hey, here's your fiction and mythology, which I think for me, the question when you start talking about artificial intelligence in the way that Labitut does and the significance of what's happening, there's it, and he makes this point, I think it's hard to find and stay on a middle ground where you can say, well, this is interesting. We should probably do these things, but we have to wait and see. That this is the subject. This is one of those subjects that I think provokes a strong response. This is great. This is going to cure diseases and save save the
Right, right,
environment,
right,
fix the
right,
world,
right,
or it's going to kill us. And
right.
so I think that there's this tension that he's sort of struggling with a little bit about, well, I'm this, but then there's that. Certainly you and I have talked about it. I find that the way this is composed sort of is an interesting nod to that tension.
That's a really great point, and we'll get to the meat of the essay in just a moment. But let's linger with that since you brought it up. I think you
Yeah.
brought up a real interesting point that uh, I wanted to say something about the Herbert intertext. The Herbert intertext is a little bit it's binary.
Yeah.
You're saying that, I take your point, and I very much agree with you. I take your point to be that when it comes to things like AI or thinking machines, sentient intelligence, we tend to really binarize about it. We
Well, it's
tend to
also
think,
almost as
yeah,
if you can't have that conversation somehow without
mm,
invoking science fiction and without invoking certain
true,
mythologies.
true that,
Because,
that too, true.
um, so, anyways, I thought that was,
Well, I was just going to say that the Herbert example couldn't be more binary. In fact, it's
mhm.
not even binary. It's just no, no,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the force of the Butler, the Herbert example is that um, given, presented with the pharmacon, to use Stiegler's language,
Sure.
presented with the pharmacon of AI, the Herbert, he brings in Herbert, but the Herbert example is this example. The literary example tells you to say no with thunder to the idea
Well,
of
and
sentient
Hinton at the
intelligence.
end again. The no. I mean, there's I don't know.
But I guess what I'm wondering, Michael, is do you think that's a problem? I hadn't thought of it until you said it, but is it a problem to bring in this particular literary metaphor because the literary metaphor isn't it's a metaphor with a um, kind of singular message, right?
Well,
It's not
as
an
I said though,
open-ended.
I
Yeah.
think there's two ways of approaching this, right? One is full steam ahead,
Mhm.
and then one is, oh, pump the brakes hard,
Sure.
and this is very much in
Pump the
that
brakes
pump the
hard.
brakes
Yeah.
hard side of the discussion. And I think that's one of the tricky things about this is trying to find that middle ground where you can have both sides of the conversation.
That sounds like a wonderful place to segue to I think we're ready to talk about I keep on using the meat metaphor to the meat on the bone. Um, this passage near the beginning of the essay, I think one of the reasons I want to read it um, is not just because it's an important sort of opening move in the essay, but also because it kind of indirectly touches on themes and ideas that are a mainstay. If you're a regular listener, God bless you if you are. God bless you. If you are a regular listener to this podcast, then you will be, this passage I'm about to read you um, will strike similar chords. Although where he ends up is very much well, I'll ask Michael about this after I read the passage. I mean, I think where he ends up is a place that is very unlike critical media studies territory, but we'll see. All right, so here's the relevant passage. The most enduring legacy of the jihad, he's referring Labitut, as we mentioned ad nauseum by now. He's that Butlerian jihad is the Frank Herbert intertext,
It was terrible.
the terrible war against sentient technology. Okay. The most enduring legacy of the jihad was a profound change in humankind's relationship to technology. Because the target of that great hunt, where we stalked and preyed upon the very artifacts we had created to lift ourselves above the seat that nature had intended for us, was not just mechanical intelligence, but the machine like attitude that had taken hold of our species. Quote, and here he's quoting Herbert, humans had set those machines to usurp our sense of beauty. Interesting. I had forgotten that. We'll talk about that. To usurp our sense of beauty, our necessary selfdom. That's a bad word, selfdom. Frank Herbert, come talk to me after class.
Yeah.
Our necessary selfdom, out of which we make living judgments, Herbert wrote. Humans must set their own guidelines. This is not something machines can do. Reasoning, depends upon programming, not on hardware. And we are the ultimate program! Exclamation point. The Butlerian jihad removed a crutch, the part of ourselves that we had given over to technology, and forced human minds to develop above and beyond the limits of mechanistic reasoning, so that we would no longer depend on computers to do our thinking for us. Okay, let me just make a brief comment, and then I'm very interested in hearing. I sort of set up this quote by saying that I'm imagining Dr. Rapici might be interested in where this quote goes to, because here's my reading of the quote, or my question about the passage. It begins, it ends very clearly. Labitut seems to be signaling that he is on the side of Herbert in thinking that machines cannot set the guidelines for humanity. Reasoning depends upon programming, and we are the ultimate program. Now it moves into a kind of binary logic, or an almost moral injunction against letting technology do the thinking for us. But the very beginning of this passage, which kind of piqued our interest, when he's talking about the most enduring legacy of the jihad was a profound change in humankind's relationship to technology. This idea that he's referring to, humankind's coevolution with technology, which he seems to be rejecting alongside Herbert, or using Herbert to reject. It sets off warning bells for me, because this is the moment that I think goes kind of off the rails for critical media studies, because we're used to talking about thinkers who kind of assume that the human technological, whatever, and even when they are, and I'm thinking primarily of Stiegler and Heidegger, even when they are fiercely against technocratic rationalism, letting mechanistic reasoning, all the things that Herbert is upset about and that Labitut seems to be upset about. The first part of it, they presume that humans and technology have a common fate. They have a common history in Stiegler's imagination, in Stiegler's schema. Basically, technology enables human evolution. And there is this idea of a common fate that is being worked out by humans through technology. Again, a kind of blending of the human and the technological, that it seems that Labitut / Herbert is rejecting to core.
I think so. But I think that the reason that they're rejecting it as forcefully as they are, is tied to this notion of evolution.
Hmm.
And the thing that as you're talking, and I'm jotting some things down here.
Hmm.
The thing that keeps coming up for me is this notion or this aspect of evolution's time, right? And we've talked ad nauseum on here. One thing about the digital age that we always go to is the rapid acceleration, right? And what
Sure.
that does to time.
Sure.
And so I don't see,
That's in particular Stiegler's point.
yes, in this situation, like, to say, okay, well, this is a co-evolution, right?
Mhm.
An evolution takes time. And here, the language is clear, right? Because the targeted great hunt, where we stalked and preyed upon the very artifacts we had created to lift ourselves above the seat that nature had intended for us. This is not so much an evolution as a replacement, and it's a quick replacement, right?
Mhm.
AI
Great
comes in,
point.
and you just think about the way, for
Yeah.
example, that something like ChatGPT has taken root and how quickly, right? I know in my world, it was literally a case of one semester, everything was fine. 4 months later, everybody's losing their mind,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So this was, I think, more a case of what's happened is we have this machine or this thing which has relieved us of the burden of thinking. It is making choices for us. And the question that we're going to talk about a lot here is really what, what's the difference between the brain and the mind and thinking and reasoning, and what is a decision, and what does it mean to be conflicted, and how do these sort of less obvious concerns about arriving at an answer take shape. But to me, this is really the problem, and I think the force of this pushback is tied to the fact that we didn't evolve with the machinery in this case, right? So yes, the
That's
hammer
interesting.
evolve, we evolve with the hammer. It enables things, right? In this situation, it's like when that machine goes on, in relatively short order, we've ceded control, or at least we've sort of abdicated our role as decision makers. What that does to, deep thought or the
Right.
arts or whatever is going to be collateral damage. The problem here is that we've just shut this off. The machine-like attitude that had taken hold of our species.
Right. Right.
Humans had set those machines to usurp our sense of beauty, our necessary selfdom. That's a bad word, you're right. Out of which we make living judgments. It's like there wasn't so much an evolution where we were gradually phased out. Like we did this.
That's a great point. Yeah,
So
go ahead. I'm
that's
sorry.
no, that's all. Yeah, and let me see. The part reasoning depends upon programming, not hardware, which we are the ultimate program, right? So I was playing, I was asking the various chatbots and the AIs. As I was waiting for you to come on, I was like, well, are you gonna, what's the story here? What are you doing? And what's the difference between the brain and the mind was one of the questions I was asking. Like, well, the brain is the hardware, the mind is the software. And that's that, Google was trying to appease me to let me know that everything's going to be okay, that I should turn out the lights and go to
It's,
sleep and just don't
it's,
worry about it. But I think that that's really
it's going to
interesting
be
here.
okay.
It'll be fine. Just here, watch this. Just watch this really good this video for you. Um, Reasoning depends upon programming, not on hardware, and we're the ultimate program. If I'm going to believe my digital overlord, right, what that's really saying here is like, hey, we need the mind. We don't need the apparatus, which is going to create a series of binary relations and tell me that
Right, right,
push
right,
this button.
right, right. Well, I'll tell you when we met for our pre-game show to talk about this episode, I picked this passage and I thought I was going to use Stiegler and Heidegger and kind of use them to browbeat or to beat up uh, the castigate, yeah, Labitut and Herbert,
And
right?
Herbert.
But I am chastened, Dr. Rapici, because I think you're exactly right. What I neglected to think of was precisely what you pointed out, and what you pointed out was crucial. It's not the Stiglerian narrative where you have a, you know, 1,000 year thousands of years evolution of humankind with technology, where there is this kind of enabling
See,
or empowerment of technology. We're talking all of a sudden about a the abdication,
yeah,
actually.
I think a decent, explanation here is like if you think about, and this way we can say that we talked about McLuhan. If you think about the role of television, right? How TV comes in, and we sort of evolve with television. That's been a
Right,
gradual
right,
thing. This is, I think, a much faster, much more
right,
radical
right.
interaction.
And it is the temper, and what you also pointed out to me is that, especially in actually the Herbert quote, which I was going to bag on, right?
Hmm.
But the Herbert quote, Labitut chose wisely, because that particular passage is insisting on the distinction between the mind and brain, and talking about the imperative of not ceding the moral high ground
Right.
to technology. So smart. Actually, a smart way to begin the argument, wasn't
I
it?
like it.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin Labatut. I am chastened, and I'm going to continue trying to expound your essay. I'm moving now to, I guess this is the now we're advancing, we're progressing through this particular history of AI, and we're the prehistory of AI. We're not going to talk about it, but there's the fascinating, Labatut spends some time recounting the fascinating, to me at least, the fascinating story of the mid-19th century mathematician George Boole, who is interesting and crazy as a whatever,
Did you
Mad
think?
Hatter.
Did you think?
Huh? I thought so. You didn't think he was crazy? Crazy as a loon, I want to say.
I
Crazy as a
see.
loon.
Can we say that
Loon.
Boolean
Loon.
logic is formed from
From
I
an absolute
loon?
nutter. I
I
think
don't see
so.
it. I don't
You
see
don't feel
it.
that? You feel he's a straight up guy. You want to have a couple pints with him? I don't know. I think he's out of his effing mind, Michael. But
Why?
we don't.
Why? Just briefly, why?
Um, I think actually the to have the idea that one can have a mathematical language is in itself a sign of insanity.
Do you think so?
So I have that premise. So I don't know. I'm deep. I believe that language is about difference, and about the unpredictable, about the contingent. And also, language is about intersubjectivity. It becomes a medium that allows you and I and others to communicate, right?
Right.
So there's something intangible. In other words,
Yes.
there's me,
Yes.
there's you,
Yes.
there's language, and we communicate, but when you introduce language, it's like a third element that's there along with me and you, right?
I
Um, there's this kind of multiplication of things. So why do I think, let me just finish it. Why do I think Poole is out of his effing mind? Because he is allowing none in his determination to find a mathematical, a logical, to conjoin mathematics and logic. He insists that the universe has no unpredictable elements.
so I think that's a very savvy and smart answer. I guess I don't think and I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that's a very smart answer. I wish I had said it. I didn't. Very good. I guess
But
the
what is your resistance though?
well, I
And
don't think
I mean, it's a fascinating story, and this is obviously, I was saying at the very beginning of the episode, I never, not until 1900, 1800, or 1840 did
Right.
someone have the idea that you can link up Aristotelian logic to mathematics.
I
And
guess the reason I don't think he's crazy is
uh-huh.
because he is a mathematician. And I'm not going to fault somebody for
uh,
saying this is how I think, this is how
uh,
I do. He missed it. Um,
oh, I
but I
see.
think that I don't know. I'm not going to fault the guy for
Michael,
trying.
I do have a homework assignment for you.
Oh boy.
Um, when we get off the air, I want you to read the biography of Pythagoras.
Okay, some late
I don't
reading.
want you to read anything else. Just
Okay.
do a wiki on Pythagoras
Okay.
and talk to me about the rationality of mathematicians after you and I
Okay.
after
Okay.
you. I'll just say that. But
That
but
that
I
that
get your
that by
point.
the way, I just want to just to sort of break the fourth wall for a second and address listeners directly and say you too are welcome to read the biography of Pythagoras and write in with what you think. I
Read
don't know.
all on.
I do not
Read
know that I
all
want to
on.
go this one alone. Okay, fair. That's good.
Okay. Well, I bring up
Crazy or not, it was interesting. Yes.
Crazy or Not. It was totally interesting.
Yeah.
And he has that's the opening move in this history of sentient intelligence, trying to think of ways in which we can create a technology that mirrors the mind brain. And as I go to this passage, now in the two passages we're going to look at now, something that you already mentioned, Michael, about the difference between the mind and the brain. That's going to be raised here and answered in a very particular way.
So I have a
Yes, I'm
quick
sorry.
question for
Yes.
you about how
Yeah.
you read this. And this is just really from this point,
Read what part of it?
the essay pretty much from this point forward.
Oh, yes, sir.
Um, I think that it seems to me that the historical story that's told here, right?
Mhm.
The historical development of AI,
Mhm.
there doesn't seem to be a distinction made on behalf of any of the men involved in this
Mm.
between the mind and the brain. They seem to
Yes.
take it.
Oh, yes, exactly right.
Okay, I just want to
Yes,
make sure I was reading
exactly
it the same
right.
way you are, because it seems to me
Yes.
that really the overarching take is that the
Yes,
mind and the brain
exactly.
are one calculating machine that we are trying to mimic.
And Bull actually is something of an outlier in this history because the other thinkers that we're going to mention pursue that idea of the mind and brains, the monist idea of mind and brain. They pursue, that there is no meaningful distinction. They pursue that idea to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm so just to clarify, I said the distinction you had raised
Hmm.
about the topic you had raised about the distinction between the mind and brain was relevant for the rest of the essay. But yes, I mean the Labitut is complaining and it has a grudge, or not a grudge, but critique. The critique is coming from Labitut's awareness that the mind and brain are being conflated in ways that
Okay.
he
Yeah.
thinks they shouldn't be. Yeah. So let's talk about step one in that conflation. Really, well, Bull is step one,
Hmm.
but and there's step two. The gentleman who figured out. Let's at least give him a name check because he changed history. Claude Shannon, the mathematician and electrical engineer who made the invention that, oh, batteries, electricity. We can have electrical switches, and that can operate according to a binary logic too. Woo, So there's that. And then we move into our story to the story of cybernetics, not actually going back to 1943, so 20 years or so before Frank Herbert is writing Dune, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I'll just read this part of it. So, um, based on this premise, their landmark paper, who is they? In this
Uh,
case, it is Warren Sturgis McCullough and Walter Pitts. I will cherry pick from this paragraph in the middle of the article by Labitut. Based on this premise, their landmark paper, A Logical Calculus of the Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity, used a Boolean scalpel to pry open the inner workings of the neuronal mechanism of the brain. Well, really of the brain and not the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, all right, continuing. According to their scheme, each artificial neuron receives multiple electrical signals from its neighbors, just as biological ones do. If together those signals exceed a certain threshold, the neuron fires. Otherwise, it remains inactive. Having created this mathematical construct, they took their ideas one step further and showed that by stringing together these binary units into chains and loops, a network made up of them could calculate and implement every possible operation of Boolean logic. So this is the binary
Right.
logic of computer programming. What arose from this model was a new understanding of the brain and the mind. Viewed from their perspective, the brain could be understood as a computing device. So, let me finish that sentence and then
Mm-hmm.
I think we can gloss it. We can gloss the passage. And I think we've already kind of glossed the passage. What arose from this model was a new understanding of the brain and the mind. Viewed from their perspective, the brain could be understood as a computing device, a machine that used neurons to perform logic. Mental activity in humans, therefore, was nothing but binary information processed by neurons following Boolean mathematical rules. Okay. I think we kind of already glossed this. This is the moment where brain and mind are conflated, right?
Yeah, and the problem with this obviously is that, and this sentence I think in particular, right? Mental activity in humans therefore was nothing but binary
Nothing but,
information.
right? Yeah,
And so if you follow that, right, you say, well, we are essentially just one rational decision tree. And
exactly.
any sort, so what do we say then? That any sort of hesitation or confusion or deliberation is a glitch in the machine or a recycling of things.
Absolutely, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
the problem with that, right, is obviously that we're not accounting for all of the intangibles. This doesn't account for, and this is where your distinction earlier about the sort of uncertainty and the unpredictability of language becomes so incredibly important and prescient because, yeah, well, what about, I don't know, poetry? If poetry just needs to rhyme, this is fine, right?
Right, exactly. That's it perfectly.
Yeah.
That's perfect description. If if the only meaning of language was, and we had an episode on this, the going back to the Searle episode, if the only function of language was, say, performative
Mm-hmm.
utterances,
It works.
shut the door, open the door.
Right.
If that was language, the whole of language, as opposed to a category of language, we'd be set.
Mm-hmm. Or we'd
But
be screwed, as it were.
or
Right.
we'd be screwed as were. Okay, so that's the beginning of that's not quite the beginning. There's a 19th century prehistory, at least two important moves that precede it. But that's the beginning of, I guess, the computing, the ways in which Boolean logic and Claude Shannon's inventions uh, come together in the electrical device of the computer, right? And now we're just one step away from, so let's take that step, shall we, Dr. Apici?
Indeed.
We're just one step away from AI. And indeed, Labitut moves to the invention of AI, where again, we're presented with this uh, picture of the mind and brain, mind/brain. And we'll comment on it after I read this passage. Dealing with Nobel Prize winner. And one thing that's really kind of marvelous about Labitut is that these are scientists and mathematicians, but Labitut, just by telling you the history here, reminds you of how weird history and things history is, because as it turns out, the next major player in
Great,
the
great.
father of AI is none other than George Bull's great great grandson. You cannot make this stuff
I love
up.
it. I love it.
You cannot make this up. Okay, but we won't talk anymore about weird coincidences like this. But I think
But we will.
Labitut is, well, we will, but we will, because I do think this is a place where we should. You had talked, at the very beginning of our conversation, you talked about Labitut's style. He knows this.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's good
He's
storytelling. I mean,
glorying in this,
it
right?
really is a wonderful article.
It's really well done. That in telling the story of rational intelligibility, you have wild ass stuff,
Yeah.
like stuff you can never believe. If I had said, "Oh, it turns out George Bull is related to Jeffrey Hinton," you would say, "Aha, you Joker Berry." But
Directly
it's
related.
history
Yeah. Yeah.
directly. Okay. Let's go to Hinton, though, because Hinton is the next major player in this story the Labitut is relating. Hinton is widely considered the godfather of AI. He is perhaps the single person who has had the greatest influence on the field in the past several decades. And he goes on, Labitut goes on to explain the nature, or try to explain the nature of Hinton's innovation. In the 80s, he championed an approach based on deep neural nets, mathematical abstractions of the brain in which neurons are presented with code. So we're moving away from this idea of language in the brain. We're moving farther away from the mind into brain activity here when we're talking about neurons and codes. So just mentioning that, it's
Mhm.
going to get even further into that logic in a moment. Um, just by altering the strength of the connections between those neurons in the brain, changing the numbers used to represent them, the network could learn by itself. Before him, the dominant paradigm was so just in the cybernetics paradigm, right? So just 20 years, 30 years before, the paradigm was quite different. It was more to the brain, right, than it
Right.
was to the mind. But
Yes.
he turns it even further to a mind is mind. No, I'm sorry, brain is brain logic. The dominant paradigm was quite different. Most researchers believe that for machines to think, they would have to mimic the way humans reason by manipulating symbols, words, or numbers, following a logical rules. That was Boole, right? That's Boole, which is what Boole himself, as Labitut mentions, himself believed. But his descendant disagreed. Quote, crows can solve puzzles, and they don't have language. They're doing it by changing the strengths of connections between the neurons in their brain. Brain, not mind. Brain. And so it has to be possible to learn complicated things by changing the strengths of connections in an artificial neural network. Do we need to say anything about this beyond the fact that it's an accentuation, intensification of the cybernetics moment? Do you have another comment? Am I
Well,
reading that correctly? Would you agree with that reading of that passage?
I think so. It seems to me that we've shifted now. There's a lot here that is way outside of my wheelhouse, right? It
Oh, and
seems
mine too. And once you start saying, let's think of like crows think, let's set it up like a crow.
well,
I get it.
the one thing I sort of want to
Yes.
tease out of this, right,
Uh-huh.
is that it seems like what they're doing now is they're just altering the strength of the relation.
Yes.
It's no
Right.
longer an A B on off relation, right? We're
No
now
longer a binary logic.
so it's more nuanced than this.
Uh, that's interesting.
But
Is it nuance or is it just more
more
intense?
sensitive. I think it's a
Sensitive.
more
Okay.
sensitive model. I'm glad you caught that word because that's very much the wrong word. And I need nuance again, is the thing
That's
that
what's going to
makes
go away.
that's what makes language work,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right.
And so it seems to me that what we have here is a more sensitive model, a more widely adaptable model,
Adaptable. Right.
but it is, and that's hence the learning aspect of
Right.
this, right?
Right. Right.
But it still lacks, and this is why I'm glad you saved me from using nuance. It still lacks the nuance inherent
Yeah.
in
Right.
language.
Right. Right.
So yeah,
Well, you know what? After all our divagations, I think we're ready for the punchline now. So we talked about the opening frame, the Frank Herbert frame. We gave a little bit of the surveyed the middle of the article, and this sort of potted, except it's hardly potted. It's very, as we mentioned, it's very well crafted history of the development of sentient technology, artificial intelligence. And now we're going to talk about the conclusion of the essay and try to evaluate the conclusion of the essay. So here we go. So Labitut comes in with a vengeance, comes in back again, and gives us the takeaways. So I will read some passages here. Um, Faced as we are with wild speculation about AI, confronted with dangers that no one, however smart or well informed, is truly capable of managing or understanding, and taunted. Oh, very well done. Is very. This is a nice Jamesian sentence. I'm really enjoying the form of this sentence. He gets an A in my class, Mr. Benjamin Labatut. I don't know about Mr. Herbert. And taunted by the promises of unlimited potential, we may have to sound out the future, not merely with science, politics, and reason, but with that devil eye we used to see in the dark, fiction. Did you see that one coming, Michael? Fiction.
I did not.
Because we can find keys to doors we have yet to encounter in the worlds that authors have imagined in the past. Let me read that again. Because we can find keys to doors we have yet to encounter in the worlds that authors have imagined in the past. As we grope forward in a daze, battered and bewildered by the capabilities of AI, we could do worse than to think about the desert planet where the protagonist of Herbert's Dune novels sought to peer into the streaming sands of future time. I'm skipping down a little bit. And we can avoid extinction or stagnation by being more diverse, resilient, and free, evolving past purely logical reasoning and developing our minds and faculties to the point where our thoughts and actions are unpredictable and not bound by statistics. Let me just read the last line, which is a quote. And I think I have given our listeners a sense of Labitut's conclusion. After that stunning peroration, Labitut ends his essay with a direct quote from Frank Herbert's Dune Saga. Here we go. We must not bow down, but instead of bowing down before the God of logic and his many fearsome offspring, we need to remember, and here's the Herbert quote, the Herbertian injunction is, quote, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind.
So I have questions.
Please.
Okay. So the solution to this, and I don't mean this to be flippant, the solution to this is books, and that's great. And let's extend beyond this. I'm willing to say that it's not just books, right? But when he says fiction, let's just say
Imagination,
arts,
right?
the
Like
arts, the
the
arts,
arts.
arts.
The
Okay.
arts.
Um, under the heady spell of a drug called spice, to find the golden path, a way for human beings to break from tyranny and avoid extinction or stagnation by being more diverse, resilient, and free. Good. right? Like we want to
I want to
free
be
ourselves
diverse.
here.
Have I? I'm trying to
Evolving,
remember when the last month I've been diverse, resilient, and free. That's something I want to aspire to.
I want it, but I don't know. Evolving past purely logical reasoning,
Hmm.
okay,
Which is
which is the
that's an
machine.
allusion, obviously, to the to all the things he had been discussing
Yeah,
in the middle of
yeah,
the essay.
that's the machine.
The
And
machine.
developing our minds and faculties to the point where our thoughts and actions are unpredictable and not bound by statistics.
All right. Yeah.
Here's my question.
Hmm.
Okay. The answer, and I don't know why this is like, you remember the old Saturday Night Live skit, the two wild and crazy guys?
I do.
That's what we're supposed to be
Because we're
because
wild and spontaneous and
spontaneous,
crazy.
crazy guys. Because it's see the problem here, right, is that, and this is, I think, the issue that I have with these discussions to begin with. It seems to be all or nothing. Either you put all your chips into the middle of the table or you get out. Either this is great or this is bad. Like we fall into these sort of this mode of binary thinking where we can't be rational because rationality has been taken from us.
That's that's a great point, Michael.
And so we have to be irrational. Well, irrational is going to get us to the exact same place that hyper rationality is going to get us, right? Like the idea of,
You when did you become a Hegelian? That's brilliant. That is the problem. Please
no,
go
no,
on.
I'm done. That's, I mean, I was just going to,
Well, let me just add to what you said because I think you said the ultimate statement. I'm so excited that you said that. I think, and you made me see what was missing. And we had talked about this passage in the pregame show, and I was making snarky comments, but now emboldened and empowered by your genuine insight, I think I can make a better criticism of this passage. The problem that he has here, the problem with that paragraph in my mind, is that Labitut is making a mistake, that he's being insufficiently dialectical. That's
yeah,
what you
yeah,
showed me.
yeah.
That he is ironically ceding too much to the machines. And when he talks about books, and when he talks about imagination, and when he talks about unstatistical behavior, what he it's a devil's bargain because really that's a cover for irrationality, for the human ability to make bad mistakes or to make irrational behavior, which is I think ceding too much to the machines,
Hmm.
as if humans can't be reasonable, and if they're reasonable, they're too much like a machine. I'm foundering here, but I'm trying to
Well, I
second
think,
and agree with your point
yeah, no, I think
that
the
he's
argument,
ceding too much to the machine
he is,
by
and I
thinking
think
the machine is logical.
well, that's it. And I think this is to say that there isn't a form of rationality or
There you are.
logic in emotional
In
moments
emotional, right? Exactly.
or even in contradictory moments, right? Like when we find
Absolutely.
ourselves in these places, it's not to say, pardon me, that we're devoid of rational thought. I think the problem, quite
That is
frankly,
it. That's
I think
it.
the problem is on the other side of this, that we get hyper, like the machine. I think this might have been better said to say that the machine becomes so clinically rational
Rational.
that what we really need to do is to find a way to inject some of the arts, fiction, whatever, into that rationality.
Indeed. Indeed. But ironically enough, we don't like that because I'm sure you read these stories in just your casual reading, these stories about AI where they get all freaked out, where they say, the AI seems to be lying to us, right? Whenever the machine lies or misrepresents or something like that, we freak the F
Oh,
out.
absolutely.
right? So it's like we are enforcing this notion of monolithic rationality on the AI.
It is.
When
It
did
is.
that
It's
happen?
well, but then again, that gets back to the point that I think I'm trying to make, right? Is that this idea that we can't have it,
Right.
it's so hard to have this discussion dialectically that it becomes,
Exactly.
we camp at the poles and that is all.
No, no, I like I said, Dr. Michael Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel Rapici here comes to the rescue at the end of this episode. That is the issue. That is the reason for my dissatisfaction with the ending of this a very superior essay, but giving us that kind of Hobson's choice between rational technology and irrational, spontaneous humankind. It's not the right choice. It's not the right picture. It's the wrong answer.
Yeah. Well, bravo,
Um,
sir. Well done.
well, bravo, thanks to you. You know, do you have a comment you want to make? You're on fire here. I don't want to get in the way, but I just want to say one last thing and I'm done.
Yeah, let it rip.
But I don't want to get in the way of your role because okay. Um, I was just going to say that, especially now that after your, I think, really insightful critique of Labitut's concluding move, I would just add this, that one is able to agree with Labitut's restatement of Herbert at the very end of the essay that it probably isn't a good idea to make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. I think
Hmm.
it would be possible to say, okay, that's probably right. Or that can cause a lot of problems. I think one can concede that and not have to put up with all the binaries that we were uh, counting on and enumerating in the paragraph before it.
How do you mean? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean that I'm not so sure that the binary that you were speaking of
Hmm.
between rational technology and irrational humans,
Right.
I don't, you know, I think we can question that logic and still agree or still say, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to make a machine in the
Oh,
likeness of.
without question. Without question. Without
Yeah.
question.
So in other words, I mean, he has two closing moments. And I was about to say, I'm not so comfortable with one of his conclusions.
Hmm.
But I can still be pretty comfortable with the Herbertian lesson that obviously inspired him to write the essay, right?
Oh yeah. I think that the aspect of this conclusion that we take issue with is in many ways sort of the logical endpoint for this discussion because it is polarizing.
Yeah, yeah.
And and it's yeah, I mean I don't agree. We're in the same place. I agree that hey, let's not recreate the mind. That's probably a problem. Um, yeah, good job.
I think we're done with the holiday episode. Or no, we're going to have another holiday episode of.
Yeah, this is going to land right on Christmas Eve, isn't it?
um, all right.
Well, Barry, thank you, and we'll pick this up next time.
Thank you, Michael. It was a pleasure. See you next time. Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.